Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Hello, fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to another edition of Myth and Magic, the podcast for fantasy authors everywhere. And it's a special edition today because I have the great honour of interviewing the incredibly talented Canadian environmentalist. She's an ecologist, but also a science fiction and fantasy novelist, Nina Munteanu. This is an interview that you don't want to miss. I tell you that now. Her recent book, A Diary in the Age of Water, is set in the post-climatic change future and depicts Toronto in the midst of severe water shortages. And in diary form, the novel follows 4 generations of women, each with a unique relationship with water. And the book has already been described as enthralling, significant and creative. Nina talks to me about narrative responsibility and writing in the Anthropocene era, and she addresses the main challenges that writers face, and she also emphasises the importance of creating a sense of place in your fiction. She explains how to write metaphors, and she gives tips for writing action scenes. In fact, you'll want to hear this interview over and over again or take some notes because it's full of useful information. It's bumper-packed. Nina explains how courage and inspiration will help authors overcome their fear and get the job done. And if that's not enough for you, Nina also explains, and don't forget she's a scientist as well as a novelist, she explains in lay terms what quantum entanglement is. Isn't that enough for you? So let's go straight in. Let's start talking to Nina Munteanu.
Hi Nina, can you hear me?
Hello there. Hi Neil. Yes, I can.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, what's the weather like where you are?
Well, funny you should say that. As you know, as a British person, I love talking about the weather. It's supposed to be.
So do we Canadians. I think it's our number one favorite subject.
Definitely our number.
And then the second part is complaining about it.
Yeah. Well,
So what is your weather like?
Well, we're supposed to be at spring, obviously, clearly.
Of course.
And it's had a storm overnight. It's not really gone above freezing.
Not typical.
It's not typical.
Yeah,
It should be a lot better than that.
Yeah, right. Wow. I'm up in mid-northern Ontario, north of Toronto here.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit cooler than Toronto is. Toronto's right off Lake Ontario, and it's pretty balmy. They're definitely having spring. We're just getting it now. I mean, things are starting to bloom, and the leaves are coming out, and that sort of thing. We have had a couple of warmish days, so it's been nice. I just love this time of year though, because it's such a neat opportunity to watch nature just awaken and unfold.
I agree. And outside we've got an apple tree, and that's supposed to be in bloom over the last couple of weeks. I think we got away with it because I definitely saw a lot of bees around it. So I think we got away with it. Good. Phew. Definitely. I mean, I'm a gardener, so my thing I do when I'm not writing is gardening and cooking. And gardening is a really big escape for me. And I've watched this year, obviously last year, I think we put a lot of attention, didn't we? All of us, the whole globe paid attention to nature. But this year, I've noticed it's at least here in Britain, 2 weeks behind. I would say possibly 3 weeks behind last year. That's to do with the climate, isn't it? There's no doubt about it.
Definitely.
This is when you notice it, when you are a gardener.
Definitely. Yeah, you pay attention. My mom was an incredible gardener, and she really paid attention to the cycles, and the yearly cycles, the monthly cycles, the weekly cycles on a weekly basis. She just had her finger on the pulse, if you will. And that's what gardeners do, right? I mean, you're there, you're smelling it, you're feeling it, you're there every day. So you literally know it.
That's right. And gardening's all about prediction as well. You're always looking forward to the next seed coming up or the next season. You know, so it's always looking towards the future, which is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I do the same thing as an ecologist. I'm out in the forest every day or by the river here or the lake or the marsh and paying attention to nature's cycles that way, right? More to do with not just how things are changing, but how things are interacting with each other and then how that changes. And of course, that's changing with climate change. Not everything is marching to the same element of change, right? So that's
right.
Where some of the problems arise.
First of all, I wanted to just ask whether you're Nina or Nina, because I've got an aunt on my website, Nina.
Right. Yeah. It's Nina.
Nina, lovely.
Yeah.
So Nina, my understanding was a Babylonian goddess of the oceans. Did you know that?
No, although there's El Nina and El Nino. Whoa, that is very cool. I'm going to have to look that up.
Look that one up.
I've had lots of other Ninas told to me. Nina literally in Italian means little girl.
Yeah, it is, exactly.
I'm going to look that up. For sure. I should have looked that up already. I mean, I should know that, my own name. But so my last name, Monteanu.
Yeah, how do you spell that?
Munteanu.
And how do you say that?
It's a Romanian name. It's really supposed to be pronounced Munteanu, but I just can't say it that way. So I've anglicized it. I say Monteanu.
Monteano. So it's almost like Italian way of saying it.
It's exactly, which is why, because I mispronounce it like that, I get taken for an Italian, right? Nina, Monteano.
Oh, yeah.
But Munte, the first part, Munte, means mountain.
Of course.
And Anu means from. So I'm the little girl from the mountain.
That's quite nice.
Isn't that cute?
It's not as Amazonian as being a Babylonian.
Well, no, exactly. Which is, in a way that better represents my chosen profession and interest, right, in water and all that kind of stuff. Well, yes, I'm definitely going to look that up.
Well, welcome to Myth and Magic. So that's what Myth and Magic is all about, trying to look at the real world things that affect fiction, because I think fantasy has to come from somewhere. First of all, let's talk about fantasy writing. How did you journey into fantasy writing?
Because I always wanted to write it. I mean, I wanted, I write science fiction mostly, which is basically a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of what's out there is a combination of fantasy and science fiction. And I think that's more or less what I write. This particular fantasy, The Last Summoner, came to me actually in a dream and a vision actually from a picture that I'd seen on the internet. It was a knight standing there with his sword in this swamp, in a kind of within a giant cathedral, and the sun is streaming down, and he's looking up there, and in the swamp you can see remnants of other swords and remnants of war, standing there, sort of looking up and possibly asking a question. And that vision, coupled with the dream that I had, that created the nugget for the story. It was a lot of fun to write around it. And then what happened soon after that was I just started looking into wars and that kind of stuff. And I came across, just again, serendipitously, the Battle of Grunwald, the Battle of Tannenberg in Poland. And the irony of that battle, as you know, the Teutonic Knights, the Teutonic Order, was basically running Poland and Lithuania, scarfing for more, a very powerful order, warrior monks, on a crusade to Christianize that area, right? To Christianize the pagans.
Yeah, it was the last part of Europe which got Christianized, wasn't it?
Exactly, and they were just moving out. They wanted to go into Russia as well. And anyway, so in the Battle of Grunwald, basically the Polish mostly and the Lithuanians just said, enough of this. You've subjugated us. You've turned us against our own religion. You've killed many of us. They rebelled and they actually won. So a peasant army beat this amazing knight. Military force. And as you know, I mean, one knight is as good as 100, 200, 300 peasant soldiers or whatever. I mean, they are amazing force.
Yeah.
And they were crushed. And ironically, the order itself was all but destroyed. Most of the knights were killed or taken prisoner or whatever. The main reason it looks like is that they were just a little too sure of themselves, a little too arrogant, a little too whatever. And they just said, we'll take care of these people. But Polish king, he was a wily guy, and his brother was actually the king of Lithuania. They got together, the Wily brothers, and they outmaneuvered them. Yeah, it was very interesting battle. Anyway, that just spurred everything on. So I connected the dream and this image to, and of course brought in a main character, Vivienne, and got her front and center. And the fantasy element, of course, is that she has special powers. Yeah. She grew up with them. She's a certain kind of being. And that goes slightly into science fiction as well. And she can, of course, time travel as a result. So she ends up in future Paris. And there's this medieval girl, right? I just loved, that was partly what got me going, my interest in, taking a person, plucking them out of a certain area or time period and culture and putting them into one that's totally foreign. She's this brave girl, brave and knows what she's doing, etc. Quite mature for a 14-year-old otherwise, right? Because of the scenario where she grew up. I mean, 14-year-olds in medieval times were girls, were already married and possibly had a kid and were running a household or running a castle per se, or a city, right? While their husbands are off on crusade for years. So they grew up really fast. So there she is, plunked into future Paris, and she's scared to death of crossing the street.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's those ironies that I love to play around with. I love ironies.
Was it difficult to write a 14-year-old for you?
It's funny because I thought, okay, she's a 14-year-old. She's a kid. And I kind of remember when I was 14.
Yeah.
I was fairly serious as a 14-year-old.
Yeah, me too.
So I didn't really take it from me so much, but maybe I did because she was quite serious. And she was a young girl. So she was self-centered. She was thinking about herself.
Yeah.
She was a little inconsiderate because if you read the book, you would know exactly what I'm referring to in the beginning. She gets herself into trouble because she's just thinking of herself. So she's going to be married off to some ugly dude.
Yeah.
I take that from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. She's some foreigner that she doesn't know, and she really doesn't want to do that. And she creates a scenario that, it's definitely all about her. And this is typical for a 14-year-old, you would think. On the same token, on the corollary to that is she's growing up in a time where, the main household, the housekeeper is reminding her, has to remind her that she is going to be the head of a household within a month or two, right? Yeah. Actually, on that very day, she was supposed to be married. That's when the book starts. And when you're the head of a household, you can't afford to be a flighty little girl, right? So she's being groomed to be that. And there's her inclination not to be more like a kid. And to go back to, was it difficult to write that? Probably not, because I'm sort of a kid at heart. And so I brought that in. But I took advantage of the fact that she lived in that time period. So when she gets moved instantly, when she travels in time to the future Paris, I have fun comparing her to other 14-year-olds. She is more mature than that. Yeah. So that was fun to write. So she seemed more like, a girl in her 20s. And I'd say that's just fine. So I didn't fret over that kind of anachronism, because I think it exists. So I think I got her just right.
But, what you could go into is a simple idiot's guide, if you like, to the quantum entanglement.
Quantum entanglement, eh? I wrote quite a bit about quantum entanglement in my book, Water Is. It's a nonfiction biography of water, actually. And a lot of water's properties are quantum. So, in fact, I talk about water being quantumly entangled. But it was in 1982 that Alain Aspect at the University of Paris discovered that under certain circumstances, subatomic particles can instantaneously communicate with each other from long distances. I mean, that's really what quantum entanglement is. So it doesn't matter if it's 10 meters or, billion
100
meters.
light years, yeah.
Yeah, light years. Somehow each particle knew what the other was doing. So that's synchronicity. That's like what the Vedas called akasha. And there's a number of terms that get used. The notion that particles can be linked in such a way that changing the quantum state of one instantly affects the other. So quantum physicist David Bohm, amazing physicist, he suggested that the reason these subatomic particles could remain in contact with each other, like know what each other is doing, is not because they're sending magical signals back and forth, but because their separateness is an illusion.
Everything is joined together.
Yeah, okay, so he talks about fish in a fishbowl. Think of a single fish perceived as two fish reflected through a fish tank.
Yeah.
But they're really all the same fish. So it's a perception thing. Think of the fingertips of a hand. Seen by themselves, they're separate. But if you see them or you know that they're part of a hand, then they're all connected.
Yeah.
Right? They're just an extension. So to Bohm, the universe is like a flowing hologram. He uses that hologram image a lot, where all parts of a whole are connected in a flowing holo movement.
Wow.
So when I had that the image given to me, in fact, by a colleague of mine about the fingers in a hand, that just clicked for me.
Yeah.
So I hope that kind of that explains it to me anyway.
Well, that's a superb explanation. And also it does, send a shiver up my spine, because it is all about what I started talking about right at the beginning, which is myth and magic is all about understanding the science behind the fantasy, because obviously clearly that does explain everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Everything is connected. So you're a scientist then, clearly. So what was your route into science then?
Well, yeah, that was convoluted because, how early do you want me to start? Because when I was a little kid, I think I was always fascinated by the environment. I certainly was, nature and the animals and plants. And at an early age, I can't remember how young I already was. I was already into seeing littering as something awful, a despoilment of the environment. And I just had an interest in keeping the place. I guess I had a sense of sacredness in the environment and nature. I played in the back forest. There was a small woodland behind our house when I was growing up with my older brother and sister. And we spent our days out there in the forest playing and making magic potions out of things, nightshade, whatnot, little pool of water and moss and soil and mixing it all together. We were little witches.
Yeah.
And again, just playing out there, wandering around and just enjoying nature. And I brought that with me. And both my parents, my mother was an avid gardener. We talked about this earlier. And my dad was a philosopher. He was reading all the time, but he really enjoyed nature. And he was the kind of fellow that always came home with flowers for my mother. He would bring home a stray dog that he'd found in some alley. So he was always rescuing animals. And so there was that nurturing of the environment that grew up. It wasn't something overt. It was just the way it was, that the way that we grew up. And so I got involved in, the recycling movement, which wasn't doing very much back then when I was a little kid. And it seems like a century ago. But, nowadays recycling is everywhere. But at one time it wasn't. It really wasn't. So I convinced my parents they should recycle. And at that point, there weren't recycling depots or blue boxes out. You had to make a point of doing it, right? So things like that. And I got involved in some environmental group and it went from there. And I actually wanted to be an environmental lawyer.
Oh, right.
I wanted to go into environmental law. I thought, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to, change the laws and protect the environment against polluters, etc. Because I got some information about all that, and I thought that's going to be my action thing. That's going to be my gift to the world. And I did find out that I figured out that law is not for me. I would get emotionally involved. That's my problem. And then it's of course, law is a lot of work. It is. So I shifted into ecology, biology, the sciences. Yeah, I kind of prior to that, as a little kid, I was at the same time I was into the arts. So I was going to be a fine artist, and so I had these two passions, as you can see, or these two areas that I was interested in. One was a passion for action, and the other one was a passion of expression and creation. And I wanted to be an artist. I was really interested in cartooning. I was thinking of being a cartoonist. And then my parents quickly said, well, you can't live off that. So they shifted me towards commercial art, because I actually was a very good artist. But even that didn't, that kind of crumbled away. But I take that art with me, and I take the writing with me. So what I've done now is blended. I became a limnologist as a career. I did that for 20, 25 years, 2 decades. As an environmental consultant. So I wandered around and looked at streams and zoomed around in boats and did water samples, wrote up reports, and made my recommendations to companies and governments and stuff. But on the side, I was always writing my stories. I was always a storyteller as well. So I've kind of shifted back and forth. I was always doing one, even though I was, had one, the other as a career. So now I've shifted my career from the sciences into the arts. So I teach now. I teach writing at the University of Toronto. And of course, I'm writing my novels, and I'm writing short stories, avidly writing short stories, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah. I was going to ask you whether it's been difficult to balance pragmatic science with fictional excitement, but I imagine the answer is that you haven't.
You're right, though. I mean, it is a balance, and sometimes one gets in the way of the other, but more often one informs the other. And it is a bit of a balancing act. You're so right, Neil, to be able to do what I've managed to do, because usually you're not in that circumstance. So I was both lucky, fortunate, and maybe wily even a little bit, in that I was looking for those opportunities, and I took them.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
So you touch, obviously, understandably, on ecological considerations when you're writing your novels. So your stories often have that kind of dimension to them. Do you think it's important that all fantasy authors start thinking about incorporating ecological considerations in their works?
Definitely. I think when we talk about something like that, where most people think the obvious, bring the environment in and make it into a character, which is sort of what I did in my latest eco-novel, Diary in the Age of Water. Water was actually a character, a subtle character. I mean, all the main characters were linked with water. It was all about their relationship with water. But there are other ways of bringing in environmental considerations in novel writing. In fact, Margaret Atwood actually asked that question a while ago. She said, where's the writing of the Anthropocene? And what she meant by that was the Anthropocene is now this age of change, the age of humanity, right? It isn't meant hubristically. It's meant our impact and what we're doing. And it's mostly about climate change and how we're changing this planet, literally as a force.
Yeah.
And all writing can incorporate that aspect if it's going to report on what's going on and our part in it. So I'm of the ilk that all narratives have a responsibility to report some aspect of reality in our world. We live from our stories. We live by stories, and the stories that we tell about ourselves and the narratives that we give to others inform us in terms of where we go and how we see ourselves, and right down to being actionable. So there's no reason why we can't incorporate that in stories. And I do think we have a responsibility to do so. And my thought is that we are in fact doing that already. There are a lot more stories out there, novels, all kinds of stories, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, that are basically apply or acknowledge what is going on, the reality of our environments. So, for instance, a romance can be set in a place where there's an underlying element of climate change going on. There's no reason why that can't be the case. And part of that is incorporating the environment more avidly in storytelling. So many books really kind of miss that. They miss the sense of place and the sense of environment and setting. This is, in fact, often a sign of a beginning writer, that they don't bring in place so realistically. If you think of some of the best books, best novels, short stories that you've read, I bet you they all have a strong sense of place. They don't have to be eco-fiction. They can have a strong sense of place. And I'm thinking of science fiction Ray Bradbury, who is a king of metaphor.
Yeah.
You know, his book Martian Chronicles. You know, it's so much about place, but it's more than that. It's our place. So it connects us to the place, and in terms of impact back and forth, it's not just how a place impacts character, which is important, but it's also how characters altogether, in this case, impact place. So, you know, in that story, Martian Chronicles, you know, the planet Mars played a pivotal role as metaphor to colonialism, basically, right? And how we were affecting the Martians in that case. But so place and environment can play a more nuanced role in stories too, linked to its theme, so linked to what the character's about. So again, it comes back to how they're related to the place. I think it speaks to the need for writers who are reporters of the truth, essentially, through storytelling, through fiction. Fiction reports on truth, only does it through metaphor, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Through storytelling, that we see the world the way it is and report what's going on. I think that's important.
Well, that's wonderfully explained. That's really very, very helpful indeed. So thank you for that. As a lecturer then, what would you think is a good way of writing a metaphor? How would you recommend somebody starts thinking about writing metaphorically?
Yeah, metaphor. Not everybody gets it. Not everybody can write metaphor. And it's really hard to teach that. For me, writing metaphor is actually really easy. It just comes to me. But I have to say that there is an understanding of what metaphor is. And this is also why people who try too hard don't get it either. And that's where you get this purple prose coming out, or these really inappropriate metaphors. My books are full of metaphor, which I'm glad to say they are, because as Ray Bradbury said, that's what books are. They're metaphors, all metaphor, right from the title to the end, to the characters, to every element is metaphor. Obviously, it's fiction. Fiction is metaphor. But the time to pay attention to it from a brain level as opposed to the heart, because you write your first draft from the heart, and then you do your revisions more from the brain. And the brain understands the major theme, what the story's about, what the meaning of the story, right? The characters, what journey the characters are on. So what is it they need to either overcome or learn or do or become even? How do they need to change in the story? Because a good character has to change, either if it's, some enlightenment, a eureka moment, or some understanding, whatever it is. So they're on a journey, right?
Yeah.
And it's connected to that theme. Say the theme is forgiveness. And the main protagonist probably has to learn to forgive themselves or someone else or whatever through themselves. And then the environment, understanding how the characters interact with their environment. That's another very key point, how they interact with their place. The role of place in story, how it informs the character and the character in turn informs it. Once you understand all those, then the metaphors can come.
Yeah.
But before, you can't go into metaphors until you understand those, because that's the whole point of the metaphor. It's deeply rooted in theme. So that's sort of what I tell people, to pay attention. So we work through those things.
So put the foundations down first.
And then work on your metaphor, unless they come easily, which is really interesting, because the metaphors that come easily to you at first are intuitively put there, right? Because you know in your heart what the story is about, and that's important. So those metaphors are often the best, but they're not necessarily, they need to be tweaked a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And then you layer in the other ones when you're doing your major revision, because of course, as you and I know, the first draft is just like 10% of the work for a book, right? The rest, 90%, is in the revision. But it's also it's also intuitive, but it's also more from the brain.
So in A Diary in the Age of Water, Walter was the protagonist, was it?
Yes. Well, hidden protagonist. The main protagonists were these 4 generations of women.
But Walter's a character.
Definitely. Water enters into it as a subtle character. It's, you have different archetypes in stories. So the Water's archetype would probably be the catalyst, would be, the outside influence that's influencing each of the characters on their journey.
So you've touched on a little bit of sci-fi. You wrote a space thriller trilogy, The Splintered Universe.
Oh, yes. Whenever someone mentions a book, I'll go, oh, that was my favorite. And I realize they're all my favorites.
They're all my favorites. They're all my babies.
They are.
So that's a thriller.
Yes.
So it's obviously got a lot of action in it. So did you enjoy writing those action scenes? Because that's a bit different to what we've been, we're discussing all the cerebral stuff and the literary stuff, but that must be just a punchy bit of action, surely.
Oh, definitely. There's intrigue, there's suspense. The main person, the protagonist, is a detective, and she's a kick-ass detective, really. She's a galactic guardian, Rhea Hawk. I just loved creating her. I had this idea of this sultry, tall woman with a gorgeous leather coat. It's called a great coat. It's not leather, actually, because it's made out of intelligent material. Saves her life a few times, or she thinks it does. Anyway, there's intrigue there too. So it's fast-paced space adventures, zooming around all over the galaxy. She's the only human. Okay, so I've painted her as, a tall, sultry woman, but she's actually puny next to all these giant Eosians who are the police force that she works with. And she's the only human in this giant police force of Eosians from the planet Eos. And she hates them. She has issues. She's got a lot of, issues in that box. She has a bone to pick with them, and in fact, with all aliens. So she's a little prejudiced. There's a reason for that. Obviously, there's lots of good backstory. Mainly, one of them is that she isn't what she thinks she is. So it's a journey. That's her journey, right? A journey of over 3 books. Yeah. Journey of her finding out who and what she is and needing to deal with that. So it starts right off. She's bumbled up an investigation. She's investigating the massacre of a spiritual sect. Literally, all of them have been, a whole entire spiritual sect has been massacred. There's only one person left.
A bit like the Cathars.
Yes. So she's investigating it. She's got a lead, and she ends up killing her lead. Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, so she's that's just the sort of tail end of several mistakes that she's made. She's a little gun happy, and so she gets booted off the force. And of course, that's really when the story begins. Yeah. And so she thinks she's onto something huge, which she is. it's a great mystery and detective story all the way through. And it has, strange aliens, metaphysics, mysticism, and even some Atlantean connections to it. But, going back to the action scenes, which is what your original question
was, yeah.
Of course, it's going to be full of action scenes. But, they're fun to choreograph. But, you have to be careful how you choreograph them so the reader essentially just moves through them without thinking.
Yeah.
Thinking they are. So you have to reach this plane where the reader's just zooming with the action as opposed to knowing piece by piece. And, it's best accomplished through active language. So showing versus telling, and some kind of engagement through feeling, such as metaphor, bringing metaphor in. All those three are things you have to work at. I found that I had to constantly polish those to bring in the powerful verb to replace something that, was just meh, and I would put in a good action verb. It's all about action verbs. It's all about doing that well. Beginning writers, they tend to simply describe what happens in a literal way. And it's good grief. It's like reading a recipe, right? Or a list or something. It's flat. So what it is they're forgetting about the context and the meaning of what's going on, because you can add that in. In this case, less is more. And that's something that every writer has to work at. So it's a different pace than when you're writing the sequel, right? It's all about scene sequels. Yeah. So when you're writing an action scene, you need to have a bit of sequel where they're reacting.
Yeah, and exactly.
You have this essentially you're achieving this kind of wave like in terms of energy.
Yeah.
Because you can't just keep it that way. Bang, 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 because the reader goes blah. So so choosing the verbs, I think, is one of the key things.
But I think the problem is with being an author is that you already know the story in your head. It's trying to get it out on paper for the readers that is the tricky bit. I know it sounds obvious.
That's so true. That's so true. Do you ever find that you're impatient with yourself?
Yeah, of course.
You want to get, you want to move over there, and then that part of you says, "Wait a minute, I have to write it."
Right. Well, you were saying earlier about you did fine art, originally, and sometimes your hands and your fingers are not connected to your brain correctly, and that's the case with writing.
You're so right. That's a really good point, and sometimes it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's the craft. So we've got the art, and then there's the craft.
Yes.
So definitely. You've been writing some of these guides, and I know you started with the fiction writer, which is Get Published right now.
Yes.
Which has been used by colleges and universities.
Probably one of the most important things for writers is to continue to be inspired, not go into writer's block, as they say, which is so common, but also to have the courage to go through with it and to finish it. Yeah. Those are some of the main challenges that writers face, and many will stop because of that. They literally will stop writing. So I've devoted a lot of time to writing articles about that, and getting past your fear, or not even so much getting past your fear, but taking that fear and running with it and going with the thrill of it. Well, see yourself as a thrill rider instead, and harness it as opposed to try and block it. Right. Fear is probably a good thing to have.
Yeah, it's like riding roller coasters, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. So, get to the point where you can enjoy that, even though there's a part of you that's cringing all the way through. But, I wrote The Fiction Writer. I wrote it on a dare.
Oh, right.
From a friend. She said, "I dare you to write that. You need to write this kind of book." And I'm thinking, really? Because at that point, I was just starting my career as a novelist. And I didn't have that much experience, although I did have a lot with short stories and that kind of stuff. I knew the craft and I knew what was needed. So this book was really geared toward beginning writers, which makes sense. So it was the A to Z. Literally, each chapter has a letter in front of it. So it's the first chapter is chapter A, which is the architecture of writing, right? D is for dialogue, C is for character, a bunch of stuff like that. And you might wonder what XYZ are. But anyway, I think I had to get creative. Z is the Zen of passion or something like that. So I just kind of played with that. But what's cool about it is I wrote it in a month. It wrote itself.
Yeah.
Talk about things I'm sure you've run across that when, some things take a while, other things just write themselves.
Yeah.
And it wrote itself. Part of it was I had all the material right in front of me. I'd already gathered a lot of material that I use because I use a lot of expertise from other people and put it all together. And it's still being used in universities, my own course that I teach. And it's served a really good role. And part of it, I think, is because I wrote it so quickly and I wrote it conversationally. Comes across as, it's not teachy, if you will, or pedantic or whatever. Yeah. And it has a lot of good examples. And I bring in example after example so that people can connect to something. And I think that's so useful. The little books, I put them together from so many articles. I mentioned this before, that I wrote a lot of articles based on, helping other writers. That's part of, I think, what every writer should do anyway, is give back to their community. So I talked about, all the mistakes I made and how I learned from them and what works and what doesn't and why and all those things. And to go back to, the inspirational part and getting past the fear, part of that is to understand that every writer will have that. Every writer will experience that. The more meaning it has, the more it means to you, the more you're likely going to be fearful of getting it out there and exposing yourself.
Yeah.
But it's, it's part of the process is to understand that and accept that yes, everything that you write is part of you and you're expressing it. So own it and get it out there.
Good words.
That's easily said again, right?
Yeah.
But to actually do it is something else. I sometimes trick myself. In fact, my very, very first book that got out there, I was so happy to get it out. And, I went past that fear because I was actually writing a racy subject. And I got it out, and it was only then that I realized, oh my God, what have I done? What if my mother reads this? That sort of thing. But it was too late because I jumped on the roller coaster and I went with it.
So after I wrote my first book for NaNoWriMo, I thought I'm going to go straight into the next book because otherwise, if you just hang about, then you're going to have cold feet. So I went straight in and wrote a book called Slutting the Globe, which is about a woman who wants to have 100 sexual conquests in 1 year. It was only after I published it I thought about my mother and my own daughters.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Your family, right? Yeah. And that's the same thing. I discovered that was the case too. So, my sister just loved my trilogy and I thought that she wouldn't. And so it's really funny, you think these things and it's not true. So that's another lesson, is to know that, you've got to pursue your craft. It's something that you have a passion for. And this is partly what I get at with this whole idea of courage and inspiration together. You need to find something that you're passionate about, because that will help you get past the fear, right? If you're passionate about something, and it's like anything in life. If you have a passion about a subject, for instance, then you will more likely speak up. If you don't, then you'll just be a bystander, right? That's, in fact, I use that to make the connection with why people allow things to happen in nature, for instance, or not, or why they're not connecting, because they're not connected. Because they're not connected, they don't care. And in fact, that's the biggest challenge. Is it's not that they deny or anything like that. It's that they don't care. They're apathetic. And if you're apathetic about something, you're not going to bother with it.
I think that apathy, even that's a strong way of describing it, because I think they are connected, but they're not connected to those things. They're connected to a whole load of stuff.
Yeah, that's actually, yes, that's a good, that's a better way of saying it. You're very right. I forget who it was who mentioned the difference in relationship with water or the environment. And he said, and I'm going to mess it up, but I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit. He said, if we'll exploit what we think is useful, but we'll defend what we care about. That's the key. Yeah. It's about what we care about. It goes back to apathy, not even connection, because you have to be connected to something to exploit it. You have to understand its utility, but to be connected to it in a way that you care about it comes back to love and passion.
That explains the precious nature of things like diamonds and gold, which there are only a finite amount of that in the world.
Exactly.
We think that water is infinite or oxygen is infinite, but clearly it's not. No, and when you actually run out of water or oxygen, you'll soon find out which is more precious.
Yep. and that's it. And that is changing. Yeah. I mean, this is the other thing that kind of rankles. It does rankle me sometimes, but I have to remember that people don't understand these things. I'm an ecologist, and an ecologist looks at relationships between all manner of things. It's how things function together in relationship. What we tend to do most of the time is compartmentalize. And we compartmentalize, we don't bring in the relationships of the compartments. So when we deal with problems, we deal with them in a compartmentalized way without understanding that they are part of a larger whole. And again, it's back to David Bohm talking about
it's quantum entanglement.
Parts of a whole, right? Yeah. So we don't understand that if we deal with this one compartment, we're not addressing all the other things that is connected to, and therefore we're not really handling it properly. And that's that exploitive sense, right? That's not seeing how things are all connected.
One message out of this interview is to open all those doors, let all the atoms fly about.
Yep. Yeah.
Enjoy them connecting together.
Yep, for sure.
We're coming towards the end now. So let's just quickly talk about what you've got planned for the coming year. So what's currently going on in your world, and what's your next project?
Well, I'm writing what I'm calling my COVID COVID novel.
Right.
in self-isolation here. It's actually loosely, I guess, a sequel to A Diary in the Age of Water. Again, of course, water plays a role, but it's a different sort of book. It's A Diary in the Age of Water was in fact a diary nested within a narrative of the far future. Future being discovers the diary, then we read the diary itself, and then we go back to the future being again. Consequences thereof. This one, it takes place in that same universe, that same world, and it brings in some of the characters. They were probably minor characters in the other book, and it's a thriller though. It's a fast-paced thriller. I'm back to that, which I really enjoy writing. And it's four main characters who are disparate, homeless, and they're not connected, and eventually they get connected, essentially in an overall narrative to protect water. But it's all across Canada. It takes place from coast to coast, and includes some major events in the past, as well as geographical considerations. So it takes place up in the Arctic, in Halifax during the Halifax explosion. I don't know if you know about that, back in 1918 or 17. The largest explosion before the atom bomb took place in Halifax as a result of two ships colliding. So there's, it brings that narrative forward, and there's ghosts in it. There's a kind of genetic disease is going on, experimentation, government manipulation, corporate corruption, all that stuff is in there. Wow. So you can imagine it's going to be a fast pace. These four characters are all very different and very enjoyable. I wrote that's part of it. I'm still writing it. I wrote a lot of it so quickly because the characters just came to me whole. It was just amazing.
How long will that take to edit?
It's about halfway through. And I think it's going to be another 6 months, and then probably edit it and get it to a publisher. Probably my same publisher. I'm not sure. We'll see for next year. Hopefully next year.
Good luck with that. So, how many words do you think that will end up being?
Probably about the same. So I think a diary was about 300 pages. So this one will probably be about the same, 200 to 300. Yeah. Oh, thrillers tend to be shorter, right? They're not big like fantasies. My fantasy, I think, was over 300, close to 400 pages. Yeah.
Have you got anything else planned?
Enjoy the summer right now.
Exactly.
I just enjoy this area that I'm in. I'm in the Kawarthas in Ontario, and a lovely countryside. And,
have you got any prairie around there?
A little bit. Well, there's farmland, not so much prairie. Farmland. It's very rolly because of the drumlins that the retreat of the glacier left. A lot of drumlins and eskers. So there's lovely country roads that I just adore traveling, up and down these hills. It reminds me of the hills of Quebec when I was a little kid. And it's just so beautiful here. So I'm just doing that. But I'm also writing a lot of short stories. I love the short story form. I don't know if you write short stories, Neil.
No, I was talking to a chap last week. You might have heard on my interview, but he's a short story expert. And he was saying how useful it is because sometimes you have great ideas, but you don't want to they won't extend across a novel, but you also don't want to lose them. So put them in a short story.
Oh, that's remarkable. That's cool. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I love the short story for that. You can get an idea and work with it and it's done and it's quick and it's fully complete, right? Again, it's like David Bohm was saying, the parts of the whole, right there. And it could be, it has a fractal relationship to the larger pieces. And in fact, I've done that. I've created short stories from long, and I've created long from short story.
Oh.
So it's really fun to play with that.
So how can readers get hold of those and listeners? How can they get hold of those short stories then?
The best way to contact me, by the way, to find out about me and my works, is just to Google me, really, because my name is not that common.
No,
there's a few of us out there, a few Nina Montianos, but and a lot of Ninas, as you pointed out, but very few Nina Montianos. So that's one really good way to find me because I'm all over Google. But I have several websites where you can find out a lot about my work, what I'm working on, and my books and my teaching. So ninamontiano.ca is about my writing. ninamontiano.me is about my coaching and just the writing world generally. The Meaning of Water is all about water, and my books on water and anything to do with water issues, etc. And then, of course, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. My handle is the Alien Next Door. I think it's maybe Alien Next Door. Anyway, there's that. There's me, the Alien Next Door.
Sorry, you said earlier that you're doing some coaching or some workshops. Can listeners get involved in that at all?
Oh, definitely. I give webinars from time to time. I usually do that for groups. Like I said, I teach online. So a lot of my one-on-one coaching is via internet or Zoom talks and that sort of thing. So they can contact me via the website. They can find my email and look me up, and we can go from there. Because every consultation is going to be different. It's based on, so some will come through, some will need more consultation, one-on-one talking. Others have a manuscript they want looked at and need in-depth feedback, that sort of thing. So it depends.
Well, fantastic. We could go on talking for ages because I wanted to talk about Teutonics and nights.
Oh, yes,
I think we
me
ran
too.
out of time. But we'll have to do that next time. So
okay,
it'd be great
definitely.
if you come back and tell us more when you've got your next book out. And
thank you.
Love to have another chat.
Thank you again, Neil. That was lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.